Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the press conference for BlackBerry, which screens this evening in the competition of the 73rd Berlinale. Let me introduce these people who you already know because you saw the film. Starting on the far right, Cary Elwes, actor. Glenn Howerton. Jay Baruchel. And Matt Johnson. As usual, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. We'll get to you. Yep, right there.
Hi from Ukraine.
Hi there. Hello.
Actually, it's so far my favorite film, which I've seen, previews
very
included.
much.
It's the second day.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we had previews, and it's not only competition. So, lots of love. And I've got two questions. First, how did you get the screenplay? Well, how was the process? Because it's one of the, the most rhythmical and clever screenplays I've seen in past month and even years. So how was it done? How did you find the author? And the second one, whom do we have to contact in order to show your film in Ukraine in our public film festival? Because we really fall in love with it and now we want to bring it to our country.
That's amazing. Thank you.
I can answer those backwards. Contact Paramount. Paramount owns the film in Ukraine, and I'm sure they'd be happy to screen it there, to be honest. I'm not sure when they're releasing it. And then I think the speed of the script is mostly a function of the editing. I think Kurt Laub and Robert Upchurch did a lot of cutting to make a script that really had a lot of dialogue seem much faster. So I give most of the credit to that, to them. That's sort of what defined the pace of the film more so than the writing. Because on set, we were really taking our time with how the actors were delivering things, and we weren't in any way trying to do things to a kind of rhythm. We were just playing everything naturally from what I remember. And so a lot of that musicality all comes from the editing. And that's just what you get when you shoot two cameras at the same time. You can cut whenever you want, and that's something that was really important to us.
Thank you.
Hey guys, Jason
pal.
Weber from Canada.
How's it going, buddy?
The difference between Waterloo and Silicon Valley is kind of the difference between shooting a film in Toronto, Hamilton, and shooting in Hollywood. I'm wondering, Jay and Matt, if you could talk about the unique opportunities and the unique challenges of making Canadian films and telling a Canadian story on the world stage without succumbing to the obviousness that would have taken a film like this and put it through an American machine.
Good question. You first, buddy.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's funny, it's kind of like you can't really tell. I said this earlier, but it's tough as a Canadian, I think, to see beyond the water you swim in. So I'm not sure necessarily what we did to try to avoid the pratfalls that a lot of Canadian films fall into that give you that bizarre, uncanny valley that I'm sure many of you as critics often see with Canadian content where you're watching it, you're like, I don't know what this is, but something is wrong, right? And in my opinion, often that's a kind of ersatz Americanism that Canadian filmmakers try to emulate, which is so pathetic, obviously. And to get away from that, I think you need to just figure out a style that's uniquely your own and just stick to it and not cave to the pressure of doing things the way that maybe more experienced regulators would want you to, because there's a massive pressure if you can't tell. I'm not sure what things are like in Germany, but there's a massive pressure for us to emulate American filmmaking style. Massive. And it's so nefarious that it bleeds into the culture so that even film students, for the most part, are really just trying to recreate American films the way that they're made, and unfortunately that's never going to happen in our country. In the same way that here in Germany you're not going to be making American films because there's an American culture around filmmaking that you imitate at your peril. And so for Jay and I, what we tried to do was keep everything as local as we could. We worked with an entirely Canadian crew. All the people in key roles on the film were my close friends who I'd grown up with. And we wanted to maintain a aesthetic that we developed in Toronto and not break too far from that. In terms of the financial logistics of that, really it just meant working with Canadian financiers and not working with Americans, and I think that got us halfway there. I'm sure your perspective is different though as an actor.
Yeah, so for me it was like it's just a very simple thing, and forgive me if I sound like a bit of an asshole when I sort of say something as underwhelming as what I'm about to say, but it's like, I think you kind of just got to do your thing and not worry about everybody else, which is, I think, how most movies are made elsewhere. When I say not worry about everybody else, I mean not worry about getting into Blockbuster or whatever the modern equivalent of trying to break into the States is. You know, I've often talked kind of publicly about how frustrating it is to watch a movie that you know is Canadian, as everyone, you can hear it in their accents and you can see the bloody CN Tower in the background, but someone opens their wallet and there's American money in there out of a sort of servile kind of pre-censorship, right? And so I think that, like, I was a fan of his because I loved the stories he told, and I loved that he wanted to tell them where he told them. And that is exactly how I feel, and you and I have talked about that sort of thing before. And so it's as simple, it really is as simple as saying the movie takes place in Waterloo, Ontario, and not saying Waterloo, Canada, because out of fear that somebody might be like, what's Ontario? And as if that's going to make them turn the fucking movie off, right? Like, that just doesn't happen, right? So it's just about, like, what he's talking about is it is part of a larger kind of fight in English Canada against hegemony of the country to our south. And this is our sort of burden, and the only way that we can sort of get past that, if that's a thing to get past, is to just sort of like assume we're anywhere else and make the movie that we want to make. Simple as that.
I wanted to say that I really enjoyed the movie. I laughed a lot.
Thank you.
It was very fun.
Thank you.
One of my favorites so far. Well, this question is for Glenn. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where Jay's character and Glenn's character, Jay's character breaks some news to Glenn's character, and he reacts in a way that we're not used to in the rest of the movie. Like, he doesn't get angry at all. Yeah. And I would say, like, maybe he's kind of proud even. I don't know. How would you say it?
We talked about that. We talked about that moment a lot, Matt and I. And what you sensed in that moment was quite deliberate. It was, you know, I mean, Matt had this wonderful idea of putting all these masks in my office, my original office, and then even in my office at RIM. And it's a moment where you see Jim's mask come off. But what was really important to me in that moment was to start that moment very much trying to maintain the persona that I had cultivated for many, many years. And then to realize in that moment that there was no point in doing that anymore, that Mike had in some ways done exactly what I would have done. And I respect it, and I'm happy to pass the burden of having to be this person on to him and move on with the rest of my life. And that's what that moment was for me. Yeah.
Hi, Helen Barlow from the Australian newspaper. I had a fucking BlackBerry just at the time when iPhones were coming in, and I'd come to festivals like Berlin and I couldn't use it. It was just becoming obsolete so rapidly. I just wonder if any of you guys had an experience like that, and I'm so pleased that you're so true to your headband, Matt.
You know, it's funny. I really didn't want to wear this headband, but I was encouraged. Your question seems to be whether each of us had BlackBerries, and I'll go first and admit not only that I never had one, I've never touched one before we started shooting this movie. The first time I ever held a BlackBerry in my hand was on set. I had no cultural relationship with them whatsoever, apart from knowing that my dad used one. So I think I was an outlier in that.
For me, BlackBerry was one of the few countries that I had like a true sense of brand loyalty towards. Like I only got rid of mine about 3 years ago when my sort of mother teamed up with my wife and my sister and said, "You're not on group text, so you can't see your baby niece." So I was like, what do you do with that, right? And I'm like, yeah, but I like the buttons. That doesn't do anything. So now I'm just like every other person. But yeah, I adored it. I adored the tech. I thought it was a great machine. And I can't believe I said I adored the tech. God forbid I ever say that sentence again. But yeah, it was a wonderful machine. And I was also like, I'm going to get real hokey here. I was proud that it was a Canadian thing, and I tried to, wherever possible, kind of support, my stuff made in my country. So yeah, I loved it. And it was a huge bummer when everyone stopped using them.
I do not support Canada. So I never had one. Oh, no. I love Canada. I really do, actually. My wife and I talk about how much we love Canada all the time. That's actually true. But no, I never had a BlackBerry for the exact reasons that everyone loved and wanted a BlackBerry. Those were all the major selling points of what was great about having a BlackBerry were all the reasons that I didn't want one, which is to be available at any time to communicate with. I just want to be left alone most of the time, and to have this damn thing pinging and beeping at me all the time was just an absolute nightmare. So I didn't do it until I saw the iPhone and was completely seduced by it, just like everyone else was. I was like, well, that's just so cool. There was nothing cool to me about the BlackBerry. It was just like, it's just a mini computer. I didn't even like my computer. If I could have thrown my computer out the window, I would have. You know what I mean? I didn't want just a small thing. But then the iPhone, oh, so cool.
You hear this shit?
Yeah. So no, I didn't have one.
I actually was a fan of Palm, and I know. So I know. I'm old school, but I helped build 3M because I spent a lot of money on that device. I never had a BlackBerry, and I didn't even know it was a Canadian company actually until I read the script, and so. But I thought it was appropriate that Matt cast me as Carl Jankowski, being a Palm Pilot fan. So.
Big Palm guy.
Yeah, it was very difficult. We were looking for actors who specifically only used Palm Pilots.
It was down to me and maybe.
And we found
5
Carrie,
others.
and Kelsey Grammer.
That was it.
That was it. It was two to pick from.
Jesus Christ. Question in the back.
Yes, my name is Markus. I work for Press TV in Sweden.
Hi.
First, I want to say, like other people said, I was surprised how good the movie was. It was really good and great acting performance.
Surprised by how good? You mean looking at us?
It was the first movie I saw in Berlin this year, and it was really good. I was surprised. Yeah.
Thank you.
Glenn, you were playing Jim as a kind of like tough character, like a little bit of the Wall Street guy. But still, it was a serious role. You still made it really funny, the character. So tell us shortly about that. And Matt Johnson, you're the writer, director, and you're one of the leading acting role. Just tell us shortly about that experience.
My approach to comedy, frankly, is the same as my approach to, or sorry, I should say my approach to dramatic work is the same as my approach to comedy. I will always approach it from the standpoint of fighting as hard as possible for the character to get what he wants. Whatever that is, and constantly checking in with the people that he's trying to get what he wants from to see if he's getting it, right? This is the basic acting shit, right? But, so for me, there's almost no difference between a comedic performance and a dramatic performance. If there's any difference at all, it's what the character is fighting for. Often in a comedy, what the person is fighting for is insane or ridiculous, and that's what makes it funny, to me. I don't like comedic performances that are anything less than dramatic performances about a character who's fighting for something ridiculous. So my approach wasn't really that different from my approach to comedy. I recognize that there were aspects of it that were funny, but it was certainly never played for laughs. Not that that's what you were suggesting, but yeah.
You were asking about me acting in this? Originally, I had no plans to act in this, mostly because all of our partners were vehemently against it. Actually, they're sitting right in front of you. Wow, that's crazy. I remember Niamh saying, I don't see you in this role. And I thought, well, okay.
He's right there, everyone. He's right there.
Yeah. Johnson, I love you. I don't see you as Doug. And it was Jay who on the phone, when we were talking about the film, said, I'm only going to do this if you'll act with me. And I thought, fuck, this is going to be really hard. Because not only am I going to need to live up to his impression of what that's going to mean, but it means that what he's actually saying to me is, I want you to be there to support me as an actor. And we wound up doing that the whole film. And that was really the treat of my life. Because it wasn't really like directing a film. It was really like having that relationship that you see in the movie expand outside of the context of the film, because that very much became our relationship in real life as we were making the film, as he had some very deliberate things that he was trying to do, and I was always trying to maintain a sense of fraternity and camaraderie on set, and sometimes those really came into conflict with one another, but it made our job a lot easier because it meant that we could relate as friends both in the film and in our actor-director relationship, which was very important to Jay, to his credit. Like, so much so that he almost, and actually I would say Glenn as well, it was like the three of us almost had a little cabal where we would just speak about what we were doing, and that conversation never really, from the three of us, broke out into larger group discussions. So it helped me hugely. But I saw it as a directing tool more than as a means to an end as an actor. Sorry, Niamh.
How much did you regret that decision, Jay?
Oh, we'll see. we're just beginning the promo cycle.
That's right.
So
We'll
who
figure
knows?
that
No, it's simple. I liked his movies, and he's in all his movies. So I was like, if I'm gonna be in a MJ movie, I want MJ to be in it. Sorry, she had a question.
Hi, Deborah Cole from AFP News Agency. Matt, I was curious about what you were speaking about earlier about that sort of particular Canadian sensibility, maybe way of storytelling, aesthetic. If you could kind of articulate, how you would define that. And then for you and possibly also Glenn, apart from the clothing and the glasses and the technology, I felt like this kind of particular type of toxicity in the workplace was very much like of its time. And I was wondering if you could talk about that as well.
Sure. In terms of trying to define the Canadian culture via film, that's an ongoing conversation. I think the biggest flaw that we have culturally is that we haven't defined a cultural language in terms of our cinema. In English Canada, right? The French Canadians are very good. They're doing extremely well, as I'm sure you know. Many of the major American directors right now are French Canadians. In English cinema, we are really wrestling with what it is we're supposed to do, mostly because of this kind of imitation game that's happening with the United States. I think that a lot of film students, as I said before, are being put under tremendous pressure to ape all of these other styles, and our funding system is not at all set up to develop young voices, at all. Whereas in Quebec, it almost seems like a priority. And in America, the commercial system supporting filmmakers winds up creating an ersatz talent pool for young people because there winds up being money for young voices simply because the market's so huge. We don't have that in Canada. In Canada, there's virtually no market. And so it really is up to, I'm on this horse a lot, but it really is up to our government to try to find ways to support young people to take risks, and right now we're not doing that. So it's hard for me to say what the Canadian style is because it hasn't been developed yet. It's a work in progress, though.
But how much do you think streaming is going to change that?
You're talking about like the new laws happening within Canada?
Not just that, just the fact that there's a movement away from theatrical towards streaming, and the streaming market is a TV in everybody's house. I mean, it's there. There's a bigger market if you think about.
Yes, it's a bit of an equalizer. Yeah. I think. I think that at least in terms of the market question. Right, so I think what Matt was trying to touch on is that English Canadians don't typically go to see English Canadian cinema, by and large, right? Yeah. I want to rewind a second to say that we have gone through sort of like waves, right? And so there was a
Right.
period where, what was used to be called the new wave of Canadian cinema, all the 90s guys like Goyen and McKellar and
Cronenberg.
and that was all inherited kind of Cronenberg style. It was all versions of a sort of potentially cold, but about sort of really kind of harsh sexual dysfunction. That was the thing that we made movies about, and then we made movies that try to look like American things, right?
Right. We've really departed from that like golden age of about 6 people making movies in Toronto.
Yeah, like Lynn Stokovich and all these fucking crazy ass movies, right?
Yeah.
Like now, but what you're saying about streaming is at this point now, people kind of click on the thing they want that looks interesting to them, right? And so it doesn't have any kind of. My friend Jacob Tierney years ago said English Canada has to get to a point where it stops watching its shit as homework or as like the right thing to do just because you want to watch a movie, right? And we're kind of there in TV, and we've been there in TV for a while. Like Canadians do watch Canadian television. In movies, I think in streaming, they don't know the stories. They just see a movie that they either want to watch or they don't. So that makes me hopeful. Sorry, Glenn, you had they also asked you a question. She also asked you a question.
Yeah, your question's
Sorry.
about the corporate toxic culture of BlackBerry.
yes.
What do you think?
God.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about that.
Let's unpack all of it.
I don't know. Boy, heavy question. Ask the question one more time, just so I'm very clear on what it is that you're asking. Sorry.
I mean, I felt like it's a period piece, and what jumped out at me is also this kind of toxic, extremely male workplace seems very much of its time. And I was wondering, if you could comment on that aspect of the film.
I mean, wouldn't have changed my approach to the character. I mean, I guess I could wonder if Jim would have approached things differently had it not been such a male-dominated workforce.
I think definitely.
You think it would have changed the way?
Well, look, I'll say from my point of view, it was a conscious choice to keep you in rooms with a bunch of young male nerds. Because that, to me, represented a world that I knew very well from my own childhood. And it may be almost seem anachronistic, but there is a culture of like men's locker rooms, of men's sports, of men's competition that I grew up in the 90s that had a feeling that I just knew. I knew what it felt like when I was with all my friends, say, playing Warhammer, and somebody of a higher status from a sports team or something would come in the room. I knew that feeling so well. Yeah. Like I just knew it. I could taste it.
And interestingly enough, my experience in life is almost completely different. I've never enjoyed male-dominated spaces. I prefer feminine energy personally to male energy. I get.
Oh, what a nice guy!
No, I'm not. It's not. It's more just that I'm really. I think it was an interesting thing to explore as an actor. To this alpha male persona, because it's something that I reject in my real life. I tend not to like. I don't like alpha male energy. If I sense an alpha male trying to do alpha male things in a room with me, I'm just like, it just comes off as very insecure to me. It doesn't. It doesn't come off the way I think the person hopes it's coming off, which is confident. It just comes off as insecure. So. It was a lot of fun to do as an actor. It's great to be able to explore a side of myself that I don't explore in my real life. And in some ways, it's a little bit easier for me to do that, to put on that mask as opposed to just to be, something that's closer to myself. It's also just that type of person, the type of person that Jim is, has always been extremely fascinating to me. So it was a lot of fun to play, but you're right. I mean, there is definitely a feeling of toxic male energy throughout the film. I mean,
the tension. I think at a certain level is that at any moment a fight could break out, and that was something that I know Jay and I were very conscious of in introducing a guy like Glenn, specifically his characterization of Jim, to the room, because these are guys who are never going to fight. Like, Mike and I were not going to get into a fight over anything, but the idea that this guy's here and there was a threat of violence all of a sudden, even though it's never materialized, was important, right? It's very important for a bunch of guys who basically spend their lives avoiding conflict and avoiding fighting,
Right.
to be introduced to a presence where it's like, no, at any minute,
This guy can kick the fuck out
he'll
of
beat
us.
us up. It's like it very much felt like we're kids again, and this guy could beat us up if he wanted to.
And this, I assume that this wasn't in the book that you adapted to make the script.
That's what he's alluded to. Yeah, you know, it's in the gaps of the pages. This type of energy.
Yeah.
You know, you can find this in the book, but you just need to look in the margin.
But they didn't participate at all in the making of the film, Jim and
No.
Mike.
I'm very interested to see what they think.
Yeah, that's one way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aras Kiribayev, Esquire, Kazakhstan. Cinematography in this movie was really astonishing. That's what I liked a lot. And I wanted to ask about the decision-making process, why you chose to have like this chaotic, out-of-focus camera, and how did you make it like in terms of technical aspects?
How do you
Thanks.
like that, Jared, Rab, our cinematographer? Why did we choose to have this out-of-focus camera?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why. Well, no, in all honesty, the goal here, I come from a background of fake documentary filmmaking. That's all the films I've made have been fake documentaries. So I love that aesthetic. I love the aesthetic of an IQ being behind a camera because it makes everything so much more interesting to me because then I get to watch the movie at two levels. I get to watch what I'm being shown and I get to watch the intelligence of the observer. It's something I love it. I find it extremely addictive. And I also find you can play games when you use that as a tool because you can direct the audience's attention to odd things using zoom lenses. And to make this film, Jared and I wanted to graduate up to a much more cinematic space, and that meant we needed to use huge cameras with lenses that were like 3.5 feet long. I think our biggest was like a 50 to a 500 millimeter lens. So like we're talking about like National Geographic animal photography lenses, right? So that we could stay extremely far away from the actors, and I mean extremely far, so far away that let's say that we were shooting this scene right now, the cameras would be so far away we wouldn't be able to see them. And also, we shoot two cameras at the same time so that we can cut whenever we want and use moments that the actors are using that are only going to happen once. And it's one of the reasons I cast comedians. It's because I knew that their performances were going to be not just kinetic, but random. And this shooting style let me record random performances knowing that even if an actor wasn't able to ever do it again, that didn't matter because I would have captured it in both twice and in a way that I knew I'd be able to use it because the audience would be used to a language of not getting everything perfectly. So really, I'm happy you liked it aesthetically, but it is almost a practical function why we shoot this way, because it makes our job as storytellers easier, because we get to use it as a tool as opposed to just an aesthetic choice. And so I'm sure you're just a documentary fan, which is why you like this shooting style, yeah.
Andreas Tai from festivalblog.com. Your characters are based on real persons, so how did you get the information to interpret your characters? As I understood, you didn't contact the persons, or did you contact people from that era?
We did. We spoke with people from the era. We spoke with none of the people, though. I mean, this is based off a book that did the majority of the research for us, and so the entire script comes from that book, minus a few things that we took from other sources. But I was very lucky to speak with a number of Research in Motion employees, a lot of ex-employees, mostly from this 90s era. One in particular came through in a huge way, who'd kept a diary and a journal, and gave me everything that he had kind of captured while he was working there. And he was, in some ways, what I was drawing from for not just myself, but all of the characters who started to feel a bit despondent about what had happened in the workplace, because he himself left in the mid-2000s during the culture change. So he was happy to share that information, but none of the rest of us met the people we were playing. I think, oddly enough, the person who did the most research on who he was playing was probably Carrie. Do you think that's true, Carrie?
I can attest to that. These guys showed up with great preparation, all of them. I was very lucky. I got to play a character who was very much larger than life, And I always like playing characters that are larger than life. Yeah, thank you for that, man.
Well, I think it's actually true. You're being humble. Like, he knows more or less the entire biographical information of Karl Jankowski, as he was just talking about in the last interview we're in. I was learning things that I didn't even know about him, and I wrote the characters, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having known that Matt had done so much research on the story, and knowing that our characters weren't, they didn't have large public personas, so it wasn't really important so much to me to emulate the real man as it was to inhabit the man in the script. So I really focused almost entirely. I mean, I certainly researched it, but the majority of my focus really was on being the person that I saw in the script, and through conversations with Matt and what his vision of the film and the character were.
My name is Mahar Sigit, African Refugee News. This film has a script that can be easy because we know the story, Canada, BlackBerry. Obama had also a BlackBerry, if you don't know, you remember that. But you played on the characters, and I was amazed because you remembered me, John Belushi.
What a compliment.
No, really, I tell you, that was really, no, really. And so how did you manage? Because, yeah, the script can, yeah, sure, because I don't know if you saw the whole film, but I saw it yesterday night, and I went and, like, I looked at Belushi, and I said, my God, this guy is the same. So how can you tell me how you managed to do that? Because really, really great, really great.
You are John Belushi. How did you do it? I don't know. Again, I have no idea. For the people who know me, who watch this film, they'd say I'm just being myself. So, like, I'm really just playing myself and trying to be as real as I can be. I also don't like John Belushi.
No.
Not really.
What about Jim?
Look, it was a different time in cinema. Writing wasn't as sophisticated.
There's the person in this press conference.
As a performer, he is quite great. He is good. Yeah. Sorry.
You didn't have to say the last thing.
No, I know. Okay, John Belushi's a national treasure. I love him. Yeah.
But I mean, the film is, there are lots of film references in the film. Movies were obviously integrated into the script of the film, which I don't know if what happened also at the BlackBerry at RIM at the same time.
Maybe not as much. But
clearly cinema is something that is a language. The language of talking about films is something which is very important to you.
You know why? And here's one of the reasons that I thought making this film was going to be interesting for me specifically. Because you're right, that there seems to be an integration with cinema history into this film. But I believe that very accurately represents what is going on in the tech world. And I think we all know this intrinsically. It's like many of the people... I was just talking about this before, but the early internet was mostly all forums talking about Star Trek. Like, that was the early internet, okay? And there's wisdom in that. And what it's telling us is that the people who are going to be real vanguards of technology are also going to be people who are very interested in kind of nerdy sci-fi culture. And I saw that as really fertile ground for showing... a BlackBerry doesn't come out of nowhere, right? A smartphone, it's not like somebody just gets the random idea of having everybody having a phone we can talk to one another. They watch Star Trek and they go, oh man, it'd be cool if we had that, right? Right? They see a phaser, they watch 2001: A Space Odyssey and they go, oh, it'd be cool if we had that. And that germ winds up polluting the minds of a lot of really young, brilliant people, and then they try to create the world that they saw in films. And I just don't see enough of that happening, or enough of that acknowledgement happening in cinema or in culture, because we really are living in the world that we inherited from these young technologists, and they built it based on the movies they were watching. Like, it's not, I don't think that that's a conspiracy or even a profound statement, but they don't get any of the credit, Like,
Gene Roddenberry created the cell phone.
Quite literally.
Yeah,
and
Kubrick invented
and we talk
iPad.
about it almost jokingly, but these guys are, I've met these guys. They're deadly serious about sci-fi. Like, it's not funny to them. They watch a lot of sci-fi movies and really care. And I wanted to almost give like some respect to that.
And also maybe give a shout out to Steven Spielberg, because he's coming next week.
Well, yes, we knew that Spielberg was going to be the guest of honor, so I said, I got to put Raiders in there.
It begins and ends with the Raiders reference.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Is there a thematic link to that, or just you like Raiders?
Actually, believe it or not, Raiders of the Lost Ark is Mike Lazaridis' favorite movie. That was one of the best things we got from the book because it created our legal case for showing Steven Spielberg's movie in the film without needing to pay a license.
Yeah.
Which would have been impossible otherwise. So thank God.
Yeah.
Hi, Ariane Tauk here from the University College London Film and TV Society. I want to ask Matt about the process of writing the film, in particular when you're adapting from a book about the history of BlackBerry, what events you decided to extrapolate, or whether there were instances in which you had to basically create a scenario based on very little information. What was the process of adapting from the book like?
Well, when we first read the book, my producing partner and co-writer Matt Miller and I thought, one, we were much more interested in the rise of the company than the fall. Much more interested. And because of that, it actually limited our scope to what years we were looking at. And once we'd kind of peeled off, like, oh, we want to talk about the 90s and the early 2000s, it actually made the writing a lot simpler because there were much fewer events, and you talked about how did we extrapolate on the things that we didn't know. A lot of that stuff came from, one, talking with the people who were there, so people who didn't make it into the book, and then two, trying to inject things that I remembered from that time in my own life into the film. So the movie, although it is about BlackBerry, is quite personal in a lot of ways. Like, these were conflicts that I was sort of having in my own life. And so it became obvious how a lot of things would happen. And really, once these three characters kind of got spun up and went winding, the movie did very, very much write itself. Like, once you sort of have Jay doing what he's doing, Glenn doing what he's doing, and Doug doing what he's doing, the characters bounced off one another in a way where it became obvious what the next thing was going to be. So it was kind of like remembering a dream, where you don't actually write it. You're just like, oh yeah, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It was not effortful. I'll say that.
Okay, maybe we have time for one more question. If anyone has one, over there, you haven't asked one yet.
Thank you. Wazar Kristumov from Derek Radio from Bulgaria. I have a question for Mr. Houghton and Mr. Borsheo. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. In the penultimate scene from the movie, Mike Lazaridis and his CEO talk, and when Mike is betraying Jim, sort of, and gives him to the
SEC.
Yes, SEC. I want to ask you about the short answer that Mr. Houghton pronounces. It was something like, "Okay, next door," and he smiles. And for me, that was very important in the film. And I want to ask the director and the cast what they think about that intense scene. Yes, thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that it's the kind of they've both landed on the other side of the rainbow, kind of, and they have absorbed each other in a way, and there is now, where they were completely different machines, they now have a bunch of each other within them, right? You kind of see Mike become a version of Jim, or at least a version of Mike that's Jim has kind of interfered with. Jim is in that Mike, and I would argue that some of that Mike is now in Jim at that point. And when we get to that sort of ending, where basically Mike, for lack of a better term, betrays Jim, I think it probably breaks his heart a little, but he's conflicted because he also respects it and knows that this could have gone no other way because this is how I groomed him to behave. He's making the decision I would have made. And so you have this great, and what's amazing is in a movie which has, it's got some yelling in it and shit, this is a scene which is like potentially the kind of quietest, softest scene in the whole movie, and it's the one about the kind of saddest stuff. And so it was like, I don't know. I just knew when we were doing it that it was kind of the right sort of way to land the thing. And I know that, like, for me personally, the way that I was trying to play it was, be a version of him, but also hate myself for it, kind of.
Yeah, that came across beautifully, and it was fun to play against as well. I mean, this is the scene that I was referring to, that you were referring to earlier, I believe, as well. Yes, yeah. So for me, in that moment, it's both a mix of being cornered, realizing that there's no way out of that corner, realizing that the person who put me in that corner is the person that I turned into, the person who would put me in the corner, being both proud of him for doing it and also relieved that I don't have to do it anymore. Relieved, it's like a person who's like, finally somebody caught me. Now I can stop, you know. So I mean that's certainly what that scene is for me. And I have to say, it's a beautifully shot scene too. I love the lighting in that scene. You know, I'm standing. He's in a more powerful position, sitting behind my desk. He's literally in my office. He's sitting behind my desk, and I'm standing there. And yeah, this beautiful role reversal that happens in that moment, and then one of the few moments in the film where my shoulders go down, you know, and I get a chance to just kind of soften a little bit. So it was fun to get to play that moment, because you don't see that from my character throughout the film until that moment. So.
Matt, do you have a comment on that or not?
Do you have a comment on them talking about their acting?
Yes.
I'll tell you what I said with Jared early on. So we did after day one of shooting. We had a little meeting on strategy, okay? My cinematographer, Jared Rabb. We had a meeting on strategy, okay? And you want to know what the meeting was? Okay, we're not going to talk about the shots anymore, just put these guys in a close-up every take. And that's all we did. And that final scene is a great example of that working very well. Because you may not know this, but most films, and these guys would know because they've done it their whole lives, most films proceed like this. You shoot your master, then you shoot mediums, then you shoot close-ups, or sometimes the reverse. Sometimes the director will shoot the close-ups first. But these guys were so good, and again, they were doing such varied things that we needed a system where we'd be like, okay, we need to be on them in a close-up all the time. We can't shoot masters ever because we're going to miss all this stuff. And so that final scene is a great example, in my opinion, of this strategy really paying off. Because I'm telling you, if we had shot a master of that scene and then gone in to shoot the close-ups after, or vice versa, we would have missed half the good shit.
Yeah, that would have been a huge mistake.
It would have been horrible. Because what you guys are all talking about, this moment where Jay feels incredibly well, he said he hated himself. He plays that a couple times in the film where you just see his eyes darting between the sides of his head. You realize, oh, this guy knows he made a mistake. He knows he was a bad boy. That doesn't happen every time. Like, you guys just get to see the finished movie. It's really, really hard to find those little moments because they're magic and they only happen once in a while. And so your camera needs to be ready literally to be like, oh shit, this is it. And then once you have it, you have it. But if that happens in the master, you're dead because it's not going to happen again. And so this scene was us trying to be ready for these magical moments of performance so that we knew we'd be able to use it. And I think it also takes a lot of pressure off the actors because it means that you don't need to be like, okay, now I'm in my close-up, now I need to do this. Okay, now I'm in my one.
I give it everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Every shot, baby. Big, small, large, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
That's right.
No such thing as a close-up.
Yeah.
Well, I think we managed to get through a press conference without anybody asking about Glenn's hair, so it's a good time to stop. Thank you all. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.